we've had people kind of ask us, oh, what does Applico do? What are you guys doing with platforms? Why do we focus so much on these traditional enterprises? And basically, our philosophy is this, that if you're a mid to large size traditional enterprise, you have a lot of assets. You have a lot of untapped advantages. And when you look at how you can start a platform business, technically any startup business, but particularly platform businesses. Platform businesses, by definition, they have two different user groups, right? Consumers and producers. And you've got to play this chicken and egg game. And that means, you need demand to get supply and supply to get demand. And the cycle this vicious cycle just continues to repeat itself at just about every level of scale as you're growing the business. As we've seen, that can get very expensive and take a long time. When you think about, okay, how do I go about starting a platform business? Well, I could build it from scratch. I could raise money from VCs. And that's the traditional way of starting a business. Okay, great. The other way that we've seen platform businesses get started is being spun out of an existing platform conglomerate, which we've spoken about, Uber Eats being an example we talk a lot about, or a number of other, or look at Yandex and Yandex Taxi and cloud services, or Amazon spitting out Amazon AWS. You see a lot of platform conglomerates get to the point where they are spitting out their own platforms, where they're basically massive new business incubation engines, and they have 50 or 100 different teams, and all those teams are doing is building new businesses and tapping into the assets of the dominant platform monopoly core business, which now gives you a huge leg up. If you're Google or Yandex or Uber, you have a lot of assets to create a complementary or adjacent platform business. Makes sense, right? So we've asked ourselves, why don't you see traditional businesses doing this? Why don't you see a large multi-billion-dollar brand or multinational company that also has a lot of assets and advantages trying to spin out their own platforms or their own startups? Because you don't really see that happening, but they have a lot of advantages, but they're not tapping into these things. So this is the first thought piece or kind of public discussion piece on this opportunity. I think this is the next 20 years of investing. Think about it as like private equity meets venture capital. If you take private equity that is buying or investing in these mid to large size kind of traditional incumbent businesses that actually have a lot of inherent assets and advantages that aren't correctly priced into the value of that company. And now you say, hey, I have the expertise, I have the ability to spin up a platform business that is going to have a higher likelihood of winning and being successful because I can tap into these untapped resources at the core enterprise. It's a pretty compelling 1-2 punch. So what are some of these advantages? Well, here we go. So user acquisition, access to consumers and producers. This is all the way on the left side here. So what does that mean? I have customers. I have suppliers. That's 101, one of the biggest challenges of a platform. If you're a large multi-billion-dollar company, you definitely have customers that you're either working with but aren't meeting their needs or aren't catering to their needs as well as you could or should be. Maybe it's just because it's not a focal point for you. What you find is that platforms and startups in general, they build bottom up, not top down, particularly platforms. You don't want to try and go to large customers or large suppliers right away because you don't have a lot of leverage when you're first getting off the ground. You want to start small. You want to start where there's a lot of fragmented supply or demand, because if the supplier demand is not fragmented or consolidated, A, probably not the best fit for a platform, but B, if it is and you can tap into it on a fragmented basis, then you get a lot of leverage to then go to the larger demand or supply bases later on, and you kind of think about your user sequencing. Now you have a lot of leverage. You might be able to, if you were to go to the large demand or supply up front, you might be able to get them on board with your platform. Problem is you won't get good economics from them because you don't have any leverage. You're saying, hey, come work with me, bring your demand or bring your supply. Let's say it's a marketplace for products, right? bring your inventory or bring your demand needs. They're going to have all these requirements that the platform needs to comply with. So that takes just a lot of product and business negotiation, A. B, you're not going to have good economics. They're not going to agree to your economic model, usually some kind of a take rate, let's just say. Whatever take rate they would agree to up front versus a take rate after you're able to prove that you have GMV and good volume and strong demand, and you've been able to find and aggregate small fragmented supply, and the business is working and growing. The take rate that you're going to be able to command if you start there is going to be a lot higher than the take rate you're going to be able to command than if you go to the larger players from the get-go. So if you're a large multi-billion-dollar company, guess what you have? You have demand or supply, one or the other, or probably both to some degree. You have customers that you're either not catering to that well, or maybe you have customers that you really aren't even focused on at all, that you kind of ignore. Great. Channel those things on over to the platform. Same thing on the supply side. You have a lot of access to supply. Either you're actively working with supply or your M&A department is looking at buying these smaller suppliers. You just have a lot of resources there. Second one here is deep industry knowledge, right? Especially if there's any regulatory dynamics. Think about the data. Think about the data about here are the transactions. Here's what customers are buying. Here are the trends. Here's the pricing. Here's the product catalog. It's all very valuable stuff. Give me that information because that's going to help my platform spin out marketplace business just that much smarter, help me focus a lot more, give me a foundation if I'm doing any kind of like machine learning or AI kind of stuff. You just need a lot of that data, and it's hard to get that data when you're starting from scratch and very small. Funding's a clear one. You know, you have capital, you have access to capital markets, these kinds of things. Quality and trust. This is a biggie, particularly when you look at B2B heavy type of industries. But it's just very hard for a startup to have trust and to instill trust. Particularly in more mature B2C industries where Amazon has a lot of trust now. So how do you go toe-to-toe with that? There is a lot of value in trust, particularly on the demand side, but sometimes more so on the supply side, which we've seen is very important for platforms. Last bullet here is user retention. What this is really speaking to is value-added services. If you're a large multi-billion-dollar company, you have a lot of stickiness that you've woven into your business. If we're talking about marketplaces, that could be a credit facility, that could be logistics, that could be fulfillment, that could be kind of other like loyalty programs. There are all these add-ons that could be facilitating payments, lots of things that maybe the marketplace or the startup doesn't have the ability, doesn't have the infrastructure, doesn't have the know-how for it to be as much of a priority. We find that there's a lot of these value-added services that you can tap into. And the core business, the enterprise business, can help lend these and layer these on to the platform startup. So these are a handful of things. There are downsides that come with if you're saying you're a large enterprise, we're going to spin out a platform startup business separate from the core business. It's going to be an autonomous business. It's going to run independently from you. We're going to be able to tap into all of these advantages. Sounds like a nice rosy picture, right? There are downsides like speed and the ability to take risks. So naturally, the large enterprise will slow you down, whether that could be, Sarbanes-Oxley reporting requirements, whether that could be just other process legal compliance things, whether there could just be a lot of stakeholders that want to get eyes on this or have different requests or have different asks that they make of this separate platform spin-out business. I mean, you just need to be able to manage that and balance it. It is there, and it's not necessarily all bad, but I think if managed properly, doesn't take away from all the good that comes from these large enterprises. And that kind of gets to the maturity and these other kinds of things. But in general, These handful of advantages are a very big deal. This is going to be the beginning of a series of content around how can you tap into these things? What are some examples? Kind of like enterprise hacks. And how do you tap into these enterprise assets and advantages and transfer them over to these separate startup entities? This is what we do day in and day out. And there's going to be much more to share on this. Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.